question. What if the best medicine really is laughter and it didn't come with a warning label? What if healing isn't only found in a pill bottle, but in a punchline or a giggle or a belly laugh that shakes loose the pain? Today's guest has made it his mission to prove that laughter doesn't just feel good, it can actually heal you. So let's dive into the science, the silliness, and the soul of what it means to laugh our way to better health. Dr. Brian King is not your average psychologist, okay? He's a touring stand up comic, a world traveler, and the acclaimed author of The Laughing Cure. With a background in neuroscience and years of studying the psychology of humor, Dr. King blends laughter with learning to help us heal from the inside out. Whether he's on stage or on the page, his mission is clear: to make you laugh and make you well. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Brian King. Hi, Brian.
Hey, how are you? I love that, from the page or the stage. That's good writing right there.
What actually happens in the brain when we laugh?
Oh man, there's so much. There's so much. It's funny because I actually wrote, as you mentioned, I wrote a book called The Laughing Cure, and I actually had to go back and read my own book to remind me what happens. There's a tremendous amount of activity that happens in the brain. First of all, let's say that you hear a joke, or you read a joke, or you process some humor, right? Well, the first thing that happens is you have to absorb the stimulation, and so that information, that whatever the stimulation is, it's going to have to enter your brain somehow, be processed, just like every other form of stimulus. If it's let's say it's a joke that somebody told you, or you heard, well, then that information, those words, have to travel from sound stimulus to meaningful words, and then those meaningful words have to be put together for comprehension. And so we're talking about activating the auditory stimulus, the auditory cortex, relay centers in the cortex, and then we're in the temporal lobe, and then we're talking about transmitting that information to the frontal lobe for comprehension. And,
wow.
And when we get to the frontal lobe, there's the left side, the left side of our frontal lobe that will understand the words that have been stated, to form the joke, mm-hmm. right? It's our language center. We'll get the literal meaning of what's been told to us, but then our right side will recognize that there's multiple interpretations of what's been told to us, and that is where there's a incongruency between the two sides of our brain, and the realization that, oh, I thought this thing could be interpreted this way, but it's actually interpreted this other way. The recognition of that discrepancy is what triggers our brain to respond as humor. It's a way to sort of normalize the differences in interpretations of the information. Like, for example, most jokes have sort of a reversal of meaning inherent to the joke. I say something and then it turns out I meant something else. Ha ha, it's funny. Like Henny Youngman would say, "Hey, take my wife, please." With that additional last word, he changes the whole meaning of the sentence. Now, if you just take those four words for their literal face value, left side of the brain says, "Take my wife, please." Oh, he's asking me to take his wife. But right side understands that the phrase "take my wife" followed by a pause means that I'm setting up my wife as an example, and then I reverse the meaning of the sentence by adding the word "please." And so there's a recognition that there's multiple meanings that take place. The entire brain becomes active. And then once I understand the joke, then I send a signal to other parts of my brain that trigger things like laughter and the autonomic nervous system, which will get me my lungs will start moving and faster. I'll start to release energy, and I might not only will I physically laugh, but maybe I'll applaud. Maybe I'll be moved to engage in some other kind of physical activity, and all of that involves more brain activity. And so there's so much brain activity related to the comprehension and the processing and the enjoying of a joke that humor is actually one of the the very simple tools that we use to assess brain damage in people who have been in accidents. If somebody
Oh,
takes a blow to the head, for example, right? One of the first things that we will do, and again, I'm not a first responder, but one of the first things that people will do when they care for that individual was they'll try to crack a joke. And if that individual responds in an appropriate and healthy way to that joke, then the chances are pretty good they haven't suffered any brain damage, because humor uses so many resources that to be able to demonstrate humor means that your brain is probably okay.
that is so cool. And how does laughter affect the nervous system and stress response?
Mhm. Well, I mean, the nervous system is essentially the brain. It's so the effect that it would have in the nervous system is sort of included in my discussion of how it affects the brain. But in terms of our stress response, I mean, laughter is a means to help relieve stress. It suppresses stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, gives us a release for energy. Laughter helps to minimize areas in our brain that are not minimized in size, but minimize the activity.
Yeah.
Areas of our brain that are responsible for generating our stress response. So laughter relieves stress. It is sort of what laughter is intended for. It is the whole reason that laughter is a behavior that we engage in. Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation that is potentially stressful, and stress and creates a condition in our body and our brain where we need to perform some behavior. And laughter is when we recognize that behavior is not necessary, and it helps us calm down very quickly. Laughter
Yes.
is actually one of the best ways to manage stress, is to laugh. And
Yeah.
you see this. This is not, something that most people are unfamiliar with either. The phrase
Yeah.
"laugh it off." The phrase "laugh"
Yes.
has meaning because that's literally what we do. When something is bothering us and we're trying to calm down, we say, "Hey, laugh it off." It's no big deal. Laugh it off. It's good advice because it actually works.
Absolutely. So, what's the link between humor and the release of feel good hormones like dopamine or endorphins?
Well, laughter does release endorphins. It absolutely does, and so these are endorphins are endogenous opioids, and it produces sort of a pleasurable effect, just like you would expect endorphins to do. I mean, and I always like to point out that literally the name endorphin comes from the study of opioids. It comes from the study of morphine. The name endorphin is actually endogenous morphine. So
Oh,
that's how we got. So if you think, everybody knows what morphine does, right? It's a painkiller.
yes.
Everybody knows that opioids, are considered to be very pleasurable when used. That's why we have an opioid epidemic, is because
Mhm.
for a lot of people, there's a significant amount of pleasure associated with their usage. But endogenous opioids are, basically chemicals that are produced by the body or the brain that have the same effect on us as these synthetic versions of these drugs that we're used to, like
Mhm.
morphine and so on. And so to produce those naturally with humor is to induce a pleasure state. We feel good, right, because we have these endorphins running through us. And it also does have the analgesic effect. A lot of people may not realize this, but when you laugh, you actually lose pain sensitivity. And so, which is a very useful thing, actually.
Yes.
Dentists use this to their advantage all the time. They try to make
Yeah.
patients laugh, and there's actually studies that show that the more a patient is laughing, the more relaxed they are, the less artificial anesthesia that they have to use to in their procedures. So yeah, it has both those functions that are functions of our built-in endogenous opioid system, or the endorphins.
And it also affects our immune system. So, how does
Mhm.
laughter affect or impact the immune system?
Well, there's actually a lot of immuno benefit for laughter, and now this is just my own interpretation of what happens in the body. But the one of the things that happens when you become stressed is that stress through various mechanisms, whether it's direct neuronal communication or indirect communication using hormones. But one thing that stress does is it creates a condition where your body is ready for some form of action. You know, fight or flight is usually what we talk about in the context. And when you're in fight or flight mode, your body needs energy. You know, if you can think about fighting requires energy, fleeing requires energy, and all that energy has to come from somewhere, and there's only so much energy available to you at any given time. And so other systems that are currently using energy that are unrelated to fighting or fleeing have to be temporarily shut down. And one of those systems is your immune system. Obviously, our immune system is important for our long-term survival, but it is not relevant when we are in a position where we need to fight or flee. And so naturally, stress through actions via, like I said earlier, direct connection or hormones, the stress will suppress our immune system. And so anything that relieves stress gives our immune system a boost. And
Right.
laughter is one of those things that immediately relieves stress. So laughter gives a boost to our immune system primarily because it relieves stress.
That makes complete sense. So, can laughter be used as a complementary therapy for chronic illness or
Mhm.
pain?
Yeah, absolutely, and
Oh,
it is. There are a lot of
oh,
people. Yeah, there are a lot of people who use laughter in a therapeutic sense. There's a lot of different names for it. Some people call it laughter therapy. Some people call it humor therapy. There's a practice called laughter yoga, which is has therapeutic benefits. I don't really care what people call it, to be honest.
yeah, right.
I think as long as it's getting the job done, there's I guess the distinction and the reason why it's important to distinguish is because humor is not the same thing as laughter. Laughter is a physical response. Humor
Yeah.
is more, the stimulus that would generate the physical response, right? And in some situations, you have a patient population. Like, let's say, for example, I'm very aware that Cancer Treatment Centers of America have a laughter therapist at each one of their centers. And so
Wow.
I actually interviewed the head of the laughter therapy department when I was writing that book, and she told me that when they started their laughter therapy, they had a real issue in finding stimulus that would be perceived as humorous by all of their patients. You can imagine, like, all the patients in a cancer center, they're probably going to have different demographic backgrounds, different ages. They're going to come from all walks of life, and they're not all going to find the same thing funny.
Yeah.
Like, they're not all going to laugh at Dr. Brian King jokes or Grace Fraga jokes. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, everybody thinks something is different. It's different things are funny, and some people just get offended by certain types of jokes, and they were finding
Yes.
on a regular basis that it was hard to get the benefit of laughter from these people that were not always laughing at what they chose. And so they decided then to forego the stimulus. Like, let's try to induce laughter without humor. And so that's why they call it laughter therapy there instead of humor therapy. But it's there's breathing exercises, there's other activities that result in laughter that people do in groups, and that has actually been shown to be much just as effective as the benefit that you would get from laughing in response to a joke or something that you saw that was funny. So there's a tremendous amount of benefits, and there are practitioners all over the world that are recognizing these benefits and using them. They're not a substitute. I would say I definitely want to make sure
Right.
to add that it
Yeah.
isn't. you can't laugh away your cancer.
No, you can't. Honest to God, you can't.
The more you laugh, the
Mhm.
more positive the prognosis. The more you laugh,
Yes,
the likely you will recover, because laughter not only helps support the immune system, it
yeah,
also boosts the activity of natural killer cells and gamma
yes,
interferon cells. And those are cells that specifically target cancerous cells,
yeah,
when you do have cancer. And so it is, it's like, it's one of those things that I like to point out. It's like, look, you have cancer, whether you're laughing or not. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, you're either way. You're gonna have you have cancer. So if it's something
Yeah,
that you can do that A, makes you feel good, B, probably is going to help you recover. Or help speed up your progression. Recovery progression. That is. Then yeah, learn to laugh a little bit. Watch
yeah.
some silly cartoons, or do it, or practice these. If you don't like cartoons or other things, practice these. These exercises that promote laughter, because honestly, it can't hurt, and if it helps, it's going to help tremendously. So
100%. I laughed all the way through treatment
yeah.
until I didn't even have the strength to laugh at some point. But
That's
yeah, it helps a lot, and it helps you get through it, and also your mental health, which is something that laughter also improves, right?
Mhm.
Mental health and emotional resilience.
Oh, absolutely.
How does it do that? How can laughter
Well,
improve your mental health and emotional resilience?
I don't like to keep repeating myself, but it does get back to stress. And
Yeah,
almost all of our mental health illnesses that we suffer from are based on stress, or stress is a primary component of it. And anything you could do to relieve stress in your life is going to have that benefit. So laughter, of course, is going to have that benefit for all disorders that we might suffer from.
yeah, absolutely. So do you think that stand-up comedy itself can be like a form of therapy, both for the performer and the audience?
I do, and as a stand-up comedian, I've experienced it firsthand. Of course,
Yeah.
there's days where I just things weren't going my way for whatever reason. I wasn't feeling very good. I get on stage, I get a few laughs, I get off the stage, I'm the king of the world. I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
so much better. And I might not be the one laughing, but it's the audience's laughter that becomes the rush for me in that particular situation. As I'm sure you have noticed in your career as well, there seems to be an awful lot of dysfunction around comedy clubs and open mics, and almost every comedian, if you go to any amateur night, the professionals too, but if you go to an amateur night, you're likely to see like 10, 15 comedians, doing 3 minutes a piece. Almost every single one of them gets up and talks about having depression, or having this, or having
Mhm.
that, or this other. And they're, I do think that most of these people are, we like to think of them as aspiring comedians, but I really think they're just therapy patients that don't have
Yeah.
insurance. like, like, it costs much less to get on stage and vent to a room full of people. And obviously, if the comedy is entertaining and people are laughing, then obviously the people in the audience are getting the benefit as well. So
Yeah.
stand-up comedy is kind of one of those win-win situations when it's good.
Yes.
When it's bad, I don't think that helps the person on stage very much, and certainly the audience isn't appreciative. But when it's good, it is very therapeutic for all parties. Yeah.
100%. Do you think that humor can help people with anxiety, depression, or even PTSD?
100%, 100%. I reckon, honestly, some of the greatest performers are people that use humor as a means to cope with depression, anxiety, etc. People, when I was writing that book, it was only a couple years after the death of Robin Williams, and people
Yeah.
used to always ask me about Robin Williams, and if he, why do you think, why do I think he did this, or why do I think he did that? And I would always tell people, like, look, if you when you are historically dealing with some of the issues that people like Robin were dealing with, you develop coping mechanisms, and his
Yeah.
one of his particular coping mechanisms was one that gained him a lot of fans and a lot of recognition. The more intense the problem, the more the more extreme the coping mechanism gets to be. And so
Yeah.
some of the funniest people are probably some of the most tortured.
Yeah.
Because that's where the humor came from. They developed it out of necessity.
100%. Is it okay to laugh during grief or illness? Because people sometimes feel guilty.
Yeah. So I would say every situation is its own. It has its own set of rules. If I was if I was at a funeral of somebody, and I would not start making jokes and and laughing out loud if his widow is grieving, right? Like crying, right? His widow and children, are crying right next to me. Every situation is different. But I will say, after I said that, though, I do want to use this example. So I had a comedian friend of mine pass away a couple years ago. As you know, I mean, as comedians, we often will take this as an opportunity to do what we do, which is like perform comedy. And I was invited as one of his friends to perform at a benefit to his family. We were going to raise money to help his family. First time anybody, had talked about him on a stage, after his death. And the comedians before me are getting laughs here and there, but they're doing the just regular material, and then they would get all serious and say, "I miss you, Zach." His name was Zach, and they say, "I miss you, Zach," and you were a good guy. They get all serious at the end of their set, and so on, all that. Well, his ex-wife was in the audience. His widow was in the audience. His children were in the audience, and for most of it, it wasn't wildly funny, but it also was a little bit somber, And I remember for watching everybody's set and thinking about my own set, and I was like, I gotta do something about this mood. And so I took a chance. It was a gamble, but it ultimately paid off. I got on stage and just started roasting them. Like every line I could think of that I'd ever thought about this guy that was funny. Just started picking him apart. I told the crowd that I was his ex-gay lover and that nobody knew about us. I made other jokes at his expense. And then of course, and everybody is just busting out laughing.
Yeah.
His widow thanked me afterwards. She was like, "Oh my God, that was so funny. He would have loved it." His kids came up to me and thanked me. I think that it all depends on what comedians often say to each other is that you got to read the room.
Yes.
And I felt like this room was ready for a little bit more extreme humor. Because it was like, here's some jokes and then some somber, like, "I miss you," that kind of stuff. And I was just like, the jokes got to be about him. They got to be, they got to be more focused. And I brought it, and I went in, and I was relentless. And it's one of my favorite videos of me performing stand-up comedy, actually, because it was raw, unscripted, and just really cathartic. So. That was a neat experience.
That's amazing. And that leads me to the next question I was going to ask you, but you kind of answered it. So I feel like laughter can help us bond during loss or collective hardship. It really does. Absolutely. And especially loss. I remember when my father passed away, and, they had like a little funeral thing at the house, and with an open casket, which is, I can't deal with it. I couldn't even look. And so for me to deal with it, I started cracking jokes. Everybody that talked to me, I was just like having fun. And I think that's what my dad would have wanted me to do at his funeral, like crack jokes, because he was the funny one. And both my parents. And my mom comes over to me and is like, "Graciela, what are you doing? you're laughing and your father is suffering in his casket. I'm like, Dad, he's dead.
Right, right, right.
He's not suffering
Right.
anymore. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like my mom's super dramatic, and I was just like taken after my dad. My dad would probably have done that. I'm sure he did that when his father died, you know?
When I die, I hope everybody is just laughing their asses off. I hope they play like
Yeah.
a blooper reel of my life or something, that just is entertaining and helps to turn the mood around from depression and loss. I hope everybody's laughing except my wife. I don't want her to be depressed for like 6 months. But
No.
I,
Stop.
I just want her to be walking around in a black veil and just have it and get a tattoo of my name. But really, I do. It's not like we're celebrating, but we're using humor for its intended purpose. We're trying
Yeah.
to change the emotion, and that's really what it's for.
Yes. It kind of flips the emotion
Mhm.
from the pain to laughter. So that's a beautiful thing. How can someone bring more laughter into their daily life if they're not a comedian intentionally?
Well, I think the sense of humor is something that we all have. Not
Yeah.
all of us have it very well developed, but we all have it. We all have, and some of us we just go through life and we notice something, and immediately a thought pops into our head that makes us giggle, or makes us laugh. And there's a lot of people. I genuinely believe there's a good portion of our population that doesn't have those thoughts. It's not that they have never had those thoughts, but they've learned to ignore them or suppress them
Yeah.
and stay focused. They're really practical. The humor is definitely not practical. If you're
Yeah.
making jokes all the time, are you getting the serious business of life done? There's some people might question that, but I do think that it's important for those people to recognize that humor is the serious business of life because of its health benefits and other uses. And so for that, on that token, then it is important to allow yourself the opportunity to make a joke or to think a joke. And if they don't happen spontaneously, that's okay. But you can achieve laughter by just hiring professionals. And what I mean is by paying more attention to comedy.
Yeah.
As I've toured, and I don't just tour as a comedian, but I tour as a public speaker as well. And as I've toured as a public speaker, I've encountered so many people who are just dead serious about life, and they've almost had the humor bred out of them. And I'll ask him. It's like he said, "Oh, no, I never laugh." And I'm like, "Well, what kind of entertainment do you enjoy?" He's like, "I don't really, watch anything for entertainment." It's like, "Well, do you own a TV?" He's like, "Yeah, I only really watch the news." And I'm like, "Really? So that's it? That's the only channel you'll turn it on is the news?" And no wonder you're miserable. And so I would
Yeah.
say I honestly would almost prescribe. I say, look, I want you to do without news. Find something that's humorous. If you really like the news and you can't stay away from it, go to humorous news. Like the Daily Show or something like that. But try to just like turn it off and go to a sitcom or go to turn it off or go to a stand-up special or a late night show. Depending on obviously, what's appropriate whenever you're watching TV. But the point, it's important to expose yourself to things that are humorous, And
Yes.
if you have a hard time finding stuff, then think about what made you laugh when you were younger. Every grumpy adult was at one point a fun-loving kid. And you might have to go deep in the vault and whip out the Tom and Jerry reruns, but there's something that'll help trigger that funny bone, and you just start, you just gotta start small, and eventually you'll start to get your humor back.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for reminding us that healing doesn't always have to hurt, right? And sometimes the medicine that we need the most is free, fun, and contagious in the best of ways. And you've shown us how laughter is more than a mood, it's a movement towards health, connection, and joy. And please, guys, grab a copy of The Laughing Cure and follow Dr. King's adventures at drbrianking.com. Because sometimes the best way to cope is to crack up.
That's what I would say.
Dating is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is full of frogs and weird DMs. But who says you can't have fun while you're searching for that needle or prince? Say goodbye to dating disasters and hello to love that lights up your world. In Love, Laughter, and Lessons, a fun guide to dating, I spill all the secrets to navigating the dating scene with grace, humor, and just the right amount of sass. Whether you're swiping left or making eye contact across the room, I'll show you how to attract love like a magnet. It's time to stop waiting for love and start living it. Get your copy of Love, Laughter, and Lessons, a fun guide to dating today, and let the magic begin.